well, why then are we setting up server after server after server after server by hand? Why are we doing this all by hand? We're repeating the same Apache conf over and over and over again. And this even implies sort of a future direction for what we might think about a DevOps role. Continuous integration. Can we, every time we make a change to our server setup, can we deploy that immediately? Some people have done this sort of continuous deployment thing where every commit automatically goes live onto the servers. It's kind of terrifying, but it's a logical extension of the tools that we've learned how to use as developers. And unit testing. Why can't we unit test our server config? Okay, that one's actually kind of hard. And there's some good reasons why we can't unit test server configs. But I do think that this is somewhere that DevOps is heading towards. So I want to come to what I think are the cardinal virtues of the DevOps engineer. And before I go on, a little hat tip here. This is my good friend Eric Holscher. This is, but you didn't know this was Eric? You didn't recognize it? This is my friend Eric. This is at a conference, and he is taking a little power nap. But I think this image, and most of this talk really came up over a series of evenings of Eric and I drinking and shooting back and forth these ideas. Eric is in a very similar, yes! Eric's in a very similar position to me. He's a developer who's moving into the operations role, and we're sort of learning these lessons and bouncing ideas off of each other and trying to sort of wrestle with what it all means at a bigger level. So I'm using Eric as my kind of icon for the embodiment of deployment ideals. And so what are these virtues? Laziness, impatience, and hubris. Does anyone recognize these three? Yeah, it's Larry Wall's 3 cardinal virtues of the programmer. See, everything you know about programming, everything you need to know about development, you already know because you learned it from programming. So yeah, these are the virtues of DevOps. Briefly, laziness, we know what laziness is, know what impatience is. Hubris, real quick, is a masterful ego, is the sort of thing that the Greek gods strike you down for. So I like these because they feel like negative attributes. But once you start to unpack them, you can see why they really embody a lot of what we as developers try to do. And more importantly, for this talk at least, they embody what a good DevOps engineer tries to do. So laziness. Larry says, Larry Wall, anyone who doesn't know, is the creator of Perl. And don't hold that against him. He's one of the most insightful sort of thinkers about programming. And all of these quotes come from his book on Perl, the Camel book. I don't even know what the actual name of the book is. It's just the Camel book. And he writes about these in more length. And I've cherry-picked some sort of quotes from him. But he says that laziness is a virtue because it makes you go to great effort to avoid overall energy expenditure. I've written, frameworks to write a single shell script because I know that in a while I'm going to write a whole bunch more of those. And as developers, we have this impulse we see a general problem and we'd like to solve the general problem more than we want to solve the specific problem. People know what I'm talking about here? We're willing to waste a lot of time, do what seems like wasting a lot of time to reap benefits later. It's a sort of delayed laziness. We're willing to work really hard now so that we can be lazy a lot later. So for development, this is usually translated as DRY, don't repeat yourself. Right? We usually apply the virtue of laziness in this idea that we shouldn't be saying the same thing over and over again. If we're copying and pasting code, we're probably doing something wrong. And this applies to development as well. And I see it applying in 2 main ways. To deployment as well in 2 main ways. The first is strictly automation. As I've hammered on before, why are you setting up that server over and over and over again? Why are you doing the same task over and over and over again? I used to, get queries from managers about, how much, traffic have we done to this part of the site, or what were the statistics on this thing last night? And you'd run some complicated, cat grep awk sed pipeline, and you have to remember each time what you did the last time and do it over and over again. Why do we allow for repetition in our operations roles when we wouldn't allow for that sort of repetition as a developer? So here I'm going to dive in a little quick to some concrete suggestions for sort of doing this, helping with this sort of thing in Python. The good news here is that the Python community, as is generally true, has kind of started to tackle most of these problems. So I'm going to take a look at some of these tools. Fabric is a fantastic tool for doing server automation. Totally fantastic, really lightweight, really small, and just a revelation for me in terms of the easiest and fastest way to automate doing a bunch of things on different servers. My rule these days is that unless I totally can't avoid it, I don't even SSH into servers. I just write Fabric tasks, and I just run them. And this is really great because it means that one-off pipeline that you ran to pull that report, it's sitting in source control somewhere. You don't have to remember what you did. You just run it again the next time you need to do that again. And it means you can use higher level constructs like classes and subclassing and do whatever you want, because fab files are just Python scripts. Here's an example of a simplistic, semi-made up Fabric script that deploys some code. And Fabric just exposes some simple commands like sudo, which does a command, runs a command under sudo. There's a run command to run it as an unprivileged user. There's a local command to run shell commands locally. Various high-level stuff like checking whether files exist remotely. And what's really neat about this is you write this code once, and whether you have one server or 100 servers, Fabric will run it on every single one of your servers. Incredibly cool, really, really fantastic, and takes all the pain out of any of this, sort of the repetitive aspects of being an operations engineer. Why I didn't discover this earlier, I don't know. The second aspect of automation in the operations world is something called configuration management. And this is something a lot of people are using Fabric these days. Not so many people are doing anything with configuration management. Broadly speaking, configuration management refers to a set of tools that lets you describe your stack setup in such a way that this configuration management tool can recreate that stack from sort of any known starting point. So where an automation tool like Fabric is imperative, you say do this, then do that, then do this. Configuration management tends to be declarative. You say, I have a server, and it runs MySQL, and it runs MySQL as this user. And the configuration management tool figures out how to make that true on the server that you pointed at. Now, the tool that I use, and I've apparently left out the link here. Very nice. The tool that I've used is Chef. You can get it from the opscode website. I don't know what the sublink is there. Now, here's what a chef configs look like, and people are going, wait a minute, that's not Python. You tricked me. I'll come back to this a bit later, but yes, the best tool for doing configuration management in Python is not Python. It's written in Ruby, and it's Chef. And it's a neat tool. You basically say, hey, I've got this user. It's got this UID and this GID. I've written some higher level commands, so I have a command here to create a virtual environment using virtualenv, and this will, if that environment doesn't exist, go ahead and create it. Ways of syncing files from servers. And then you can sort of save these configuration tools as what's called a cookbook. Chef is, like most Ruby tools, is really cutesy about the way that it uses all its tools. So there are cookbooks and recipes, and there's a command called knife, and then there's another command called spatula. They're very cute and incredibly precious. But what it comes down to is you can create reusable sets of configuration. I can say, this is the configuration I need to run a web server. Or more broadly, I can break it, or more likely, I can break it into smaller pieces. So this is what I need to run Apache. This is what I need to put ModWizKey on top of it. This is what I need to put maybe Django on top of it. This is what I need to put pylons on top of it. And then I can sort of pick from these building blocks and build up a server based on these individual pieces.